Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom podcast. I've got Juan Verhoek here, and he is the founder of Tender Market. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Stewart. Thanks for hosting me. It's great to be here.
So we were about to get into a very, very generative rabbit hole on generative AI about, you were about to say something about how the AI, oh yeah, well, it's just going to create a slop fest. It's just going to create tons and tons of slop. But all of that slop will be technically correct, but it has no human soul and no spark of creative existence. Is that an accurate representation of what we were about to talk about? What do you think?
Absolutely. I think we are going to see a lot of AI generated stuff that's just based on the architecture.
Yeah.
LLMs are really, really good at coming up with what's statistically likely to happen next. So when everything that you're doing, you're just the average of everything that's coming up, you can't really be authentic. You can't really highlight, create authenticity or uniqueness into that sense. So everything that AI gets generated is usually very easy to pass by as, hey, this is just normal content that it's becoming very boring. Like it's only been like a year, well, it's been like 2, 3 years since it's became mainstream,
Yep.
but it's already very easy to identify small patterns,
Yeah.
and people realize that.
But wait, but you know this at a technical level, it is impossible for the computer and even LLMs to decipher whether it's something human written or not, right? That's impossible.
Yes, it is. Impossible. It's we can go down the rabbit hole,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
let's say it's very statistically unlikely.
yeah.
Yeah, like as you are determining things, there's been thousands of attempts at writing software that is able to identify is this content AI generated or not. Um, and to some extent, I feel that it all depends on the writing style of your model. It has a lot of varieties, but it's becoming quite difficult actually to understand on a theoretical level. Like you shouldn't be able to identify, but these models all have biases as well. So, like the famous M dash, ChatGPT does have that bias, but that's just because their model is biased. Uh,
But the M dash, interesting. So it's a ChatGPT phenomena, but I do believe that I've seen it inside of Claude LLM. I mean, inside of Claude. This is good. This is a very good, because now I'm getting an idea of how to maybe test for it. Um, what you just said brought up a whole bunch of different things. The first question I have is what is the difference between uniqueness and probability? Because my understanding is that these things are random, which does create uniqueness at some level, but I think that's not what we were getting at. What we were getting at is that the human being is unique in various ways that can't be replicated by the LLM. What do you think of that?
Good questions. I think when it comes to like what determines whether you're asking more like what makes the human unique in a way versus jumping into like can you so there's multiple questions to unpack
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
I think the first one is can we determine whether a content is written by an LLM or a human just by looking at it? It's not today, quite frankly, unless you are able to understand biases, and even with you understanding biases, there's no guarantee. There are a lot of websites where you can say, "Hey, is this a human or not?" Pretty much, I think we're getting to that point past the Turing test, where like, hey, a computer can really tell is this, or a person can really tell.
Well,
Is
but this is the bigger question behind that is can a computer tell? I don't think Turing did Turing talk about that? I'm gonna go research that one later. Did Turing talk um about
this?
how yeah, whether a computer could tell whether it's a computer or not?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure about that, but my assumption would be not really
Yeah.
like first test. Maybe not sure, but somebody could have come up with that as well.
Yeah, somebody else could have come up with it. Okay, and so you were onto a really good point, and so there's the black box because these things are black boxes, and the weights and the biases those are a little bit less of a black box unless they're open source, but the thing itself is a black box. And as it continues to advance, it becomes more and more of a black box. Is that true?
Yes, if you think about large language models or you think about neural networks, the more you put in between, the more layers you add, the more features that you're collecting and grabbing. So just based on complexity level, if you collect more features, there's more to be learned there. And then you end up with layers that are more and more complex. So eventually, like I'd say that's correct as well. Like the bigger your model is and the more layers that you have, the more complexity it's able to understand or take into it.
Yeah. Uh, so, so, and this is what all the foundational labs are trying to do is they're trying to make their models more complex. They do evaluations, and they do try to figure out what these things are doing. And I'm now starting to think about how do the evaluations, because because of what you just said, that dilemma, the complexity dilemma, it means, and there's always going to be an economic incentive to get the latest and greatest model, which will be more and more of a black box. There is also the economic incentive to understand the black box, but I would guess that the incentive to create more of a black box is actually a bigger economic incentive. Um, so there's like this arms race between understanding the black box and then creating a bigger black box. And the evaluations can do it, but the evaluations are a lot of marketing because they're evaluating things on frameworks, and their economic incentive is to say, look at our model and look at how good it is on these evals. And so there's like a lack of, and the third parties sort of get brought into this thing and have an incentive to agree with the foundational models. So there's just like complexity upon complexity upon complexity, which is nothing new for human society. Like that seems to be, in terms of the historical arc of human civilization, we've always tended towards more complexity. But now it's like napalm on that process. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with it? Any other kind of follow-up questions or thoughts that you have about that?
Yeah, I've always liked to follow an engineering principle called KISS. Keep it
What is
simple,
it?
stupid.
Ah, yeah, yeah,
KISS,
kiss.
keep
Yeah,
it
yeah,
simple, stupid.
yeah.
Um, because especially in small teams, like the more layers that you add to a system, the more harder it is to maintain. So if you have even different branches, it's very easy to grow on different multitudes of branches. Whenever you're
Mm.
deciding to build a system, I always prioritize explainability to some extent, but you have to look at complexity is just a variable. And even in business sides, when you make decisions, I usually have my value complexity matrix. So
Ooh, I like it.
yeah, I like to think about this type of systems as well. I'm like, okay, whenever I'm gonna choose a system, like, is a trade-off that I'm going to get from creating a more complex setup going to outweigh the bad stuff and the risk of, hey, I'm gonna take a lot longer to build this, or I'm not gonna be able to come up with explainable results after. Explainability plays a huge role on different things. So, um, are we comfortable as humans going out with systems that we can't explain and trusting them to make huge decisions? Even if you think it's more accurate than a system you can pinpoint, this is exactly why I am making this decision.
Wow. And my understanding is because of the economic incentives, we are comfortable with it because we want the latest and greatest and we want the thing to solve the problem in front of us. And we always want the thing that solves the problem in front of us because not only is that economically viable, but that is like just a human nature thing. It's like we have this sort of existential inertia to solve all of these complex problems that we have in front of us. And even though we've solved a lot of them through civilization, we just always have more problems to solve. And now the problems are becoming more complex because of the nature of civilization. And so these are really good questions. The explainability part is really a great avenue. I like the value complexity matrix and its tie into business. And you're a developer, but you're also keen on the business side, particularly now you're starting your own company. And so the value complexity matrix is really building things that are explainable. So I guess that leads to a question in the early days of, you know, these foundational labs. I bet they saw that they wanted explainable results because they were coming from a deterministic software where it was always explainable. The results were always explainable by default. And then GPT-2 comes in. I think it was Da Vinci or something like that. And I imagine that that's probably the moment where they were like where they couldn't get explainable results. Is that story accurate? Do you know much about the history from like 2015 to 2022, somewhere around there?
I'm not sure around the specifics for Da Vinci and when that jump happens, but I do know from training um, models myself, like, hey,
Mm,
how do we actually go and jump into presenting results in a way that's measurable?
yeah. Mm,
And that's very interesting. Like, it's very easy, as you said, to come up with benchmarks, even if you have good intentions. Let's assume that you don't have any perverse incentives to
yeah.
actually go and say, hey, my model is the best at doing this and it's
Yeah.
better than lawyer that, of course, all these companies have. But let's just assume that you're actually trying to measure accuracy of these models. And right now, like, I there's no way that a language model is actually going to come up and be sentient, like in the sense
Yeah.
of they do not make, they don't have reasoning abilities. They
Yeah.
actually are able to come with the next thing to say, the very next thing to say, the most likely thing to say next. And this is an incredibly powerful ability,
Yes.
but it's not artificial general intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so at this point, like throwing more data and throwing more compute at these models, there is an economic incentive, and there's actually like I am a believer that doing this is actually good because you're going to unlock a lot of information and a lot of value while you do this in a way that, hey, my model, like it will take me maybe like 200 prompts to build an end goal and actually create something that creates a website. And now you can do it with like 20 prompts, and it's just going to get better at that. So the use cases that you're unlocking
Yeah.
are incredible. We never been
Yeah.
in any moment like this, at least in my lifetime, in the last 26 years. There's never been anything like this.
Brilliant. So sentience and reasoning, really interesting conversation that can be had about there about the relationship between sentience and reasoning. And humans can obviously reason, but I wonder whether our sentience, which is somehow related to both awareness and consciousness, whether that is dependent in some way on reasoning, and whether there's a relationship there between those two things. I'm sure there's a relationship. Uh, the AGI. So, do you think that AGI does mean consciousness, or does it mean just the ability to competently solve all of the problems within this seen universe, but in the universe that we can see, you know, the all of the things that are measurable? Do you think it's just like, is that AGI, that it's just going to solve all measurable problems, or do you think that it does have a relationship to consciousness, sentience, awareness, those things?
That is such a great question. When I think, and I don't think I've actually asked this question to myself or heard it before in that context. Like, at the end of the day, like I've always been a very practical person. I love learning to build something. I don't love learning just for the sake of
Yeah,
learning
yeah,
things that I'm
yeah,
never going to be able to apply.
yeah.
So when I
Ooh,
think,
interesting. Yeah, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
yeah, when I think about these things, like, what would I rather have AGI, if let's say that the definition of AGI is actually like, hey, you're able to solve every single problem in the
Mm.
universe versus sentience.
But that's what worries people, is that it solves all the sentient problems and we don't have any work left to do. Like that is the question that a lot of people who derive meaning out of their work, which is quite a lot of people, they're worried about getting put out of a job from this machine. I am not worried about that because that just means that I will get to do all of my hobbies all the time and dance and play in the sun and do all these things. So I'm really excited about that future. If it comes to be, I'm very skeptical that we're going to get anywhere close to that very soon. But I like, but not to doubt that we are working on reasoning, and once it gets reasoning, it's going to get great to solve a lot of practical problems. And maybe we could talk about science and solving practical problems in science and whether that stuff. How close do you think we are to reasoning? Like actually, how do we evaluate reasoning? I wonder how they're evaluating reasoning. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, there's been talks about AGI and determining what intelligence could be, and
Yeah,
there
yeah,
are
I've talked about that. Yep, yep.
different high level architectures
Mm.
where you actually play around with a bit of like nature versus nurture.
Mm.
There's a theory that describes that, okay, you need both a physical architecture, you need to be able to store information, uh, but
Oh,
you also need some sort of like algorithm to learn um, from those experiences. So you're inputting previous experiences or new experiences, and then that's when it gets really fundamental. Is like, hey,
wow.
what do we call intelligence? How do you design this? Because humans, we do have a lot of inbuilt systems. Like, hey, you can feel things, you can see things, you can hear things. So we have different ledgers. All these models are trained into, we're not just text. And there is a solid understanding of how the five systems, like how all our senses are interacting with the world, that we can make a lot of decisions about this. So a lot of the research into the next models are trying to combine not only text but also trying to understand um, visuals, understand videos, understand how people actually think before coming up with these decisions. Right now, I think Jan LeCun is working a lot on this stuff, architecting on what the next big thing could be. I think that's going to get us a lot closer to AGI than any of these models are going to get us, in the sense of like, hey, that I do think it could be something that is going to come up with their own questions and their own understanding and their own yeah, like I do think we could get to that level of like reasoning from software
Whoa.
if you're able to crack that basic algorithm of like, okay, how do you design something that's actually always going to learn and it's going to learn at a fast enough rate to make
Whoa.
useful decisions? But I think like what you phrase it against, like, hey, do we really care about AGI or do we care about solving every single possible problem? You just think about Google, like huge revolution back in the day, or any search engine. Like you can put stuff in the internet and then you can actually anybody can learn from anywhere they are. So that happens in the 90s, and then in 2000s we actually get mainstream search engines. But that's a huge revolution, and then what does that unlock? Like it unlocks the ability for somebody 20, 25 years later to train large language models out of all the whole corpus of the internet to actually make decisions just based on text. And that's just what the system that we figure out on a text-based solution. Hey, we already figured out how to retrieve, how to get information, how to ask questions to these models to get us to answer really powerful, complex questions that humans can't even tell if it's written by a computer or a machine. And we're getting to that point as well where people can really tell, hey, is this video AI generated or not?
Yeah.
Because you can. The bar is just going to get higher every time. Its models are just going to get better.
Wow. Okay. So on that last problem you mentioned, there's a specific episode I did with a really ridiculous episode with the Poly Pals for my listeners about they're building a proof of liveness in video calls like this using projectors and blockchains to understand. Go listen to that episode if you want to listen to them because they're going to do a better job of explaining it. But that was proof of liveness versus proof of aliveness, and I didn't realize until that conversation that those are two different problems because what they're solving is like if we're doing a conversation like this in 2 to 3 years, the idea is that somebody's going to be able to deep fake that the entire conversation, and we won't know whether we're talking to an AI or not in real moment. But then there's proof of aliveness, which is what we were talking about in terms of the text, is proving whether it's a human generated or not in synchronous time, but in asynchronous time. And that problem seems actually much harder than the proof of liveness. Now, I really like what you said about reframing from AGI to solving all known problems, because I think that's what we're really after. I think the AGI stuff and the sci-fi stuff, while interesting and generative for imagination and all things, are really interesting, but I don't think it's very practical. And solving all known problems is really practical. Then there are the unknown problems, and I don't think we're going to solve all the unknown problems because we have to find the unknown problems first. And maybe AI can help us with that. Maybe that's something that humans can do alone. I really like the nature versus nurture and the high level architecture, building that these are known problems, or that they're, we know this, and they are thinking about these types of things and building the architecture for the nature versus nurture. Now, the reasoning, the multimodal reasoning, and the sort of we're giving senses to the machine, and the internet is connecting all of us individually to the larger collective of humanity, which is in some ways people throw around the term exocortex, and that we're essentially building an exocortex. Where do you think we're headed societally, culturally, business wise? Where is this all taking us? I know that's a big question. Feel free to take it wherever you want.
Yeah, I think at the beginning you mentioned like we're already seeing how people are valuing more authenticity. I think we are going to come out of this as a society. Like there's always the debate like, is this going to be dystopian future? Is this going to be a utopian future? And that's huge. Like we have a lot of these things. I think we first need to recognize as a society that a lot of the things that we recognize as knowledge work that we taught in universities, hey, you are able to make the decisions and you understand this at a very high level, a very low level, because you spent these 4 years learning from books, learning from certain things, and that's knowledge that was valuable. Um, some of that, like, it's part of like, are you learning because it is something that you need to learn to pass a grade, go over an exam, or you learn because it's going to be something that is going to be useful for you to build something or build on top of something to understand certain things. I think um, that's a huge difference from what I'm seeing with vibe coding, for example. You can actually create huge things with vibe coding, but there's always that time where like, hey, it's time to deploy this and get it into production or get it into uh, a domain. And there's a lot of different layers that, hey, if let's assume that I didn't go to university, I just trying to learn. I'm doing a lot of these things myself right now. Like I'm trying to learn marketing. Uh, I can go ahead and like ask an LLM, like, hey, teach me about these different things. But whenever it hallucinates, it's not obvious to me if I'm missing a critical piece in that puzzle of like, okay, this is how I understand things. Like it does make you uh like fall a lot. So I think where we're going in the future is like we are going to see a lot of models that need a human in the loop, and humans need to be able to really understand what good and bad looks like to make those decisions. And if you cannot make that decision yourself at a high level, and to understand, like, okay, I can actually understand like what this LLM is telling me to do, it's bullshit, or what this LLM is telling me to do is actually useful. I think that that differentiator it's going to be huge, and we can see it with applications that had huge traction. If you look at Cursor, one of the things that Cursor is great at is, hey, people are jumping into being copilots. I'm not blindly trusting this LLM to do everything for me. I'm able to have a high level of uh, control over what I wanted to do. And I think that's the future of software. Andrew Karpathy was talking about this. He did a keynote speak. He was a keynote speaker at Y Combinator School 2 weeks ago. He mentions we have software, three versions of software. We have software 1.0, which just 70 years ago, you were writing to these LLMs, or not LLMs, you were writing to the computer just in plain code. Then we had a jump to software 2.0, where, hey, you have neural networks and you're actually building applications a different way. You're just giving them machines a lot of data, so you're giving this answer detector, hey, this is a tumor, this isn't a tumor,
Mm.
and you make those decisions, but you had to put weights into your system in some sort of way that you can't really be explained. You sort of like to like, okay, extract this feature from this image and put it into the model. And now software 3.0, it's actually our inputs are prompts. You're able to write software in English. You're able to write software in natural language, which means everybody's a coder nowadays. And now the skill that was very valuable to be a coder 10 years ago, it's going to become less valuable just knowing what to code, how to code. What's going to be valuable is knowing what to code.
Wow. Okay. What I got from what you just said is that instead of the hard takeoff for AGI, we need to think of the hard takeoff of how bad our education system is preparing our kids for that world. Because the education system is essentially teaching people how to pass evaluations, and these aren't even as good as the evaluations for machine learning models. These are evaluations about subjective, taste for professors, which is great if you have a professor with great subjective taste, but not very good if you don't. And I would say that 80-90% of yeah, well, I won't go into my mad ravings on the system of education as it currently is. Let's talk about the solution. So the hard takeoff of how bad education is, let's actually go right into that to my next question, which is I have great personal interest right now, is understanding what is your vibe coding experience. How do you use LLMs within your coding? Are you using Cursor? Are you using Claude Code? Are you using agent swarms? I now have two friends who are using agent swarms, but me being this neophyte in terms of coding, I don't trust the thing enough to actually do an agent swarm. But I can see how somebody like you or somebody like them can be so clear in your inputs that there's no chance for mistakes and can then evaluate the inputs. Are you using agent swarms right now?
No, I'm not using agents for. So to be honest, most people that I've heard talk
Mm,
about complex agents where you
mm,
just find a goal and you let your agent do something very complex, I haven't seen that work in
mm,
most cases. Where
mm.
it's work, like I think Cursor is a good example, because they are orchestrating everything on the back end. Like they actually did
Interesting.
spend a lot of time working on that. And you can orchestrate things to a certain level. Like you do get good results to some level, but I think the level of how much time you're spending playing and tweaking the agents to create something quite complex,
Huh.
it's a very hard thing to do. And it's not only hard, it's very time consuming. So and this is, I think we go a bit back again to the like
Yeah.
sentience versus
Uh, yeah.
intelligence.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
how
OODA
much,
loops.
yeah, you can achieve a lot of the things you want to do with very simple deterministic outputs, where it's like, hey, this is the architecture it's going to follow. Here's a simple if statement. If this doesn't happen, go around and say, I'm solving 100 problems at one time. So I don't have the time to like really go deep into something that, or
Yeah.
I, yeah,
Interesting. The scarcity is the sentience. It's this the scarcity is the ability to do an OODA loop, to be like, where am I in time and space? Where am I not accurately fitted against this task? How can I reevaluate my inputs? That's the scarcity. The scarcity isn't the computation. The scarcity isn't the ability to execute on known problems. It's like defining the problem, understanding how the problem fits into the solution, all of those things. That is really a generative part. So we have agent swarms. I do think that one of my friends has figured out how to do this, but he must be streamlining his own sentience into a way that it allows it to be done by the agents. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think Karpathy describes LLM like as sarcastic people spirits, and I actually quite like that definition. Like you are coming up with something that is human-like and can make certain decisions in that way. So if you input a lot of your prompts and a lot of information into your model, like I do think you will end up with something that is kind of like you in that way. Like
Yeah,
you
interesting.
can create different things and you can get these models to behave in a way that you want them to behave with good accuracy. I think that's extremely powerful.
And it's about trust too, right? Because you have to trust the agent in a specific domain to do the thing that you want it to do. And I bet you have a lot of understanding about the domain aspect of that question because I actually interviewed, or I know Ruben Bailon, who is a former colleague of both of ours. He came to AI Whispers and he gave us the lowdown on the current race to AGI that a lot of the foundational labs are doing. And one thing that became really clear in the latest of RLHF, reinforcement learning through human feedback, the way that humans have to instill the values into the spirit thing. I didn't get the full term. I didn't write it down. I want to go. I'm gonna go get it later. Of like how you instill the values into these artificial spirits. Ooh, artificial spirits. I like that name. So the latest on that is that essentially we have now, like, for 400 years, we have cataloged the entire Western civilization's understandings into a giant library that would have made, the Library of Alexandria look like a local library, which it was. So we've cataloged that now, and now 2 years after we both met doing this type of training, it's really we've cataloged all of the knowledge, and now we've put that into the AI. And there are only these really crazy mathematical questions, really crazy scientific questions in terms of getting that into the machine. But in terms of languages, in terms of basic math, in terms of most of the questions that most humans have, it's all in these LLMs now. And not only just one LLM, it's in all of them basically, and they're all working really hard to get that entire mapping of Western of human understanding. So that's just wild. I don't know how I got here, but this is interesting territory. Any thoughts on that?
The search space for these models is
Mm.
very interesting because like how many questions can you ask these models? How many questions will they be able to keep in their memory? Uh, because pretty much you can create, I would assume, like an almost infinite number of questions, not necessarily infinite,
Yeah, interesting.
but it's huge. So I think LLMs are extremely powerful at making decisions when they have the right information, able to retrieve the right context. I think when we look and when I think about the future, like the next paradigm is going to be the softwares that are going to be next generation are going to be the ones that are able to implement a human in the loop. So you're going to have an expert
Right.
automatically actually helping you assign and make these decisions. Like you need to bring everything to the right context, and whoever's inside the system needs to be able to say, okay, now that I needed all this information before, I couldn't make these decisions, but now that I have the information right here, it's super easy for me to make this decision. Like yes, no. I'm something I'm doing with tender market. So huge standard documents, they're 500 pages long. And in page number 200, you might have like, hey, you need to write a 15-page memo about this. And you also need to have two references of a previous company or a previous client that worked in this industry. So I make it really easy for bid managers or decision makers. Hey, I have these requirements to qualify or not to this standard. I'm saving a lot of time to them before they could say like, okay, you would have to spend maybe read a few of these documents and understand, maybe spend like 1 hour per document. Now you can make the bid no bid decision in a minute. You just have all the information here. So that
So Wait. So I want to understand more what tender market does. So you've got a 500 page document, and I know from our last conversation, it's something to do with RAG and something to do with all these pipelines of how to get the right context. Are you saying that you're building a pipeline to basically help a human in the loop uh, ingest data, or an agent to ingest data, or a combination of both, or something else?
Yes, it's a combination of both things. First, so with tender market, I help connect companies with European governments.
Ah,
And the way this works is usually by a tendering procedure, which
ah,
means the government hosts an open contract, say like,
ah.
hey, we need to
Ooh.
hire, we have a $1 million budget and we need to hire somebody that is going to build this hospital. And then they go out to the market and companies can apply to these tenders. The usual way to apply to these tenders is you have to fill out a bunch of documents, a bunch of forms, and you have to have a really keen eye for compliance, because on ticking a checkbox that you should have ticked can actually cost you this $1 million contract. Even if you have everything correct, if you're not filing your documents properly, you're not going to qualify.
Yeah.
So the way I'm doing this is trying to make it as easy for these decision makers to be able to make these decisions. And I have
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
tool for this. Right now, we already built software, and similar to Cursor, like you have access to you have access to all your code files, you have access to everything that you need. So that's why Cursor, it's a good fit. We're like, okay, your code base, it's something that here's the right context. In my case, hey, your software is actually going to be pulling from uh, these documents that are already out there, and then we're able to ask questions about the documents. So one of the questions we ask is, what's the selection criteria? What's the exclusion criteria? Like, how can you get disqualified? And we just collect all of that in an easy to use interface that people can see and can then, hey, I have all the information I need to apply or this to not. That's the first part. The next thing I'm working on is, how could I make this so that I actually look at these documents, understand all the questions that I need to fill, and then have an agent actually write those answers for me. And then the final person, the final output is, people are not going to trust this agent to automatically go and submit their tenders for them, but they're going to trust them to maybe like, hey, you can fill out the documents and then you can edit whatever's missing or whatever you don't like. And so that,
Beautiful. So this reminds me, maybe we talked about it last time we talked. I want to write a novel. At first, I wanted someone else to write it, but now I think I'm going to have to write it myself. And it's probably not going to be a novel. It's going to be a short story, but it's going to be about the arms race between bureaucracies and small teams of AI-enabled teams. It sounds like you might, if with your permission, I would love to use you as a protagonist in this story. Uh, uh, because basically what you just told me is that you're building Cursor for solving that specific problem. For a little bit more context, I have been in Argentina for 2 years, and I've been battling arcane Byzantine bureaucracies all over the world for 15 years now, as I like to do my adventures in places like India and Brazil and all these places. And Argentina is the third most infuriating bureaucracy after India and Brazil. And the funniest thing I learned is that the Argentine bureaucracy actually did some stuff online. So they made it about 1% easier to navigate the bureaucracy. The funniest thing is a friend of mine heard that and he's like, yeah, but that removes the ability to get around these bureaucracies, which doesn't exist in the United States, but exists everywhere else, which is that you can pay them a bribe. And the online removes that ability to do that. Okay, so I want to write this novel, and I would love to ask you, like, creatively speaking, what would be the fun, what would be the most fun I could have writing this novel or writing a short story? Who are the players? What is the drama and the tension of the bureaucracies? Because bureaucracies are in some ways the proto-AI, right? They're a proto form of AI. Capitalism is a proto form of AI, and bureaucracy and capitalism are related as well. Any thoughts on that? About
can you
Yeah.
explain that? Yeah.
Okay, so we've got capitalism. Capitalism. Nick Land, philosopher, talks about how AI. It's a crazy thing that he. So he calls capitalism an AI, a form of proto-AI. It's a way of coordinating work to get done, and capitalism is inhuman, so it doesn't have human values. So it kind of finds where value is, and then once it's found the value, it's very mushroom-like. It just expands and expands and expands, and it doesn't think about the human values that are in that. Bureaucracy is this thing that's somehow related to capitalism because companies have bureaucracies. And then before I go into what I was hopefully, so companies have bureaucracies and governments have bureaucracies. So it's not exactly only capitalism. It's something about coordinating humans into systems. What I was going to mention is that the bureaucracies, no, I lost it. So the something about coordinating work. There's something about, but bureaucracies are also infuriating. Like anybody who deals with them just gets overwhelmed by the atomization because the bureaucracy has its own goals. That's what it was. Okay, so once a company grows beyond a certain point, usually it's around the 150 person, also can be put a metric on it as to how many billions of dollars it's worth, it becomes too big to fail. And once it becomes too big to fail, then all of a sudden, instead of just growth, a startup is focused on growth to get to that point. Once that's hit, then all of a sudden, instead of growth, other things start to matter more. And this is where it gets into the political. So you have political goals that become more important. This is why larger companies are more political, and that's where the bureaucracy takes over, and that's where your effort and your inputs no longer connect to outputs in the same way. And so for someone like me, I find them to be annoying because it's more about subjective interpretations of input and output. It's more about politically resources. It's more about battles. It's more about like you have a limited amount of promotions, so you have a more incentive to fight, and then the company starts to decline. And then it turns into scarcity, and then you're stuck in this just like giant Byzantine. And the same thing exists in governments as well. Yeah, what do you think?
It's very, very interesting comparison, actually. No, for sure, I understand. Um, when you mention like I can relate like okay, capitalism like it doesn't really have human values in
Yeah.
it. It's more about the system that just consumes everything and it keeps growing in a way. So yeah, it's very interesting what I think about bureaucracy as well. Like and you kind of touch on the innovator's dilemma as well. Like
Mm,
if you
yeah,
like
exactly.
you get big because you're trying different things. You're throwing a bunch of darts and eventually something hits the bullseye.
Yeah.
And then once you get to certain size, like you need to be able to innovate less and try different things and try to do less things because you're trying to uptake and keep the resources that you have in a certain
Yep.
way.
Yep.
Um, and in the same way with bureaucracy, like, are we trying to make like who is benefiting? And I think with all the systems, it's good to see like who is benefiting out of this. And you just mentioned like, okay, you're working with the Argentinian government or
Mm.
like the Venezuelan government, like
Yeah. Yeah.
you're
Uh-huh.
gonna be able to see very clearly, like, okay, these are systems that are perverse and that have incentives that are misaligned to
Yep.
what the outcome should be.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's something that I saw here in Europe as well. It's like, hey,
Ooh.
I want to actually go and um, do something with my skills and my knowledge. Like I have a huge knowledge in software. I have over a decade of experience working in this. I want to go and apply to these software contracts. And I was so infuriated by the idea of like, hey, I don't want to be spending 8 hours a day reading documents to then understand like, hey, I can only qualify to like one of these 20 tenders. It was horrible. Like the
Uh-huh.
initial entry requirements are tough, man. You need to spend like $100,000 to get like your ISO certifications and getting all the documents, all the processes you need in place to eventually considered into some of these contracts. So like, okay, this is a huge pain point. I'm not the only one having this. I might as well build a solution that works for me, and while I'm doing that, I'm gonna sell it to other people.
Brilliant. And I've got a bunch of people that I think you should talk to, which we can talk to after we get recording because this is not only with the European organizations, and from what I got there, it sounds like not only from the European organizations, it's also other avenues of business. One that comes to mind is the contracts for space applications to go to send rockets into space or to go through those complicated government procedures in the United States. The European, so it sounds like it wasn't just for government contracts, but it was also for large organizations. They also have this tender thing just to apply to a job in Europe that you're going through.
There are private tenders as well, so
Okay.
companies posting to other tenders for, like I think it's interesting, just because you mentioned applying for jobs as well.
Yeah.
Right now we actually have a lot of AI agents because
Yeah.
agents are getting really good at web browsing, where you can
Mm-hmm.
be like, hey, this is my resume, this is my information, go ahead and submit a bunch of proposals.
Yep. 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 Yep.
Uh, and that's going
But
to
that
be
destroys it. That destroys the authenticity. That like it destroys the hiring. Like it feels like hiring, or it feels like the relationships between employers and employees is totally poisoned. And it's some combination between employers using those things that you just mentioned, but now employees are also using them. So again, it comes back to this arms race of like who can use the AI to gather the most resources right now, but at some point there's going to be a switch between like because in the way that I like to do hiring is I like to know people. I actually I'll shout out to Francis Pedraza. I think I learned this from him, which is that like you meet people in your normal life and you connect with them and you in like that's the sign that you should kind of think about employing people and stuff like that. Whereas the online thing just feels like it's going to get more poisoned and more poisoned and more poisoned until that's the only way to do it is in your real life. What do you think? Do you think that that's right? Do you think that the AI tools are really good for doing that?
well. There's two different things here. Like I think companies have traditionally also used software to outsource,
Mm,
to not only outsource, to also make hiring decisions. Like,
yes.
hey, are these keywords in this
Yeah. Yeah.
resume?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and that's one way to look at it. So in one way, like when I look at these tools, I actually think they're quite beneficial for a consumer because now companies have to like
Mm.
put it in the other way of like, okay, like we're getting 100 applications now, which it's not a bad problem to
Oh,
do.
interesting.
You're posting job posts and you're getting the people interested in applying to these jobs to the right position. Now you have more documents to go through and more resumes to select or not. But
Yeah,
in some sort of
interesting.
way, I do like that transition. But at the same time, like I do know that's gonna poison the system, and it's gonna be like, and
Mm.
it happens with leverage and all sorts of marketing as well. Like whenever a medium has become popular, then everybody else starts switching until it's not popular or not efficient anymore. So people are gonna switch to the next new thing. Um, I think authenticity is going to play a huge role into that future, as you're saying. Like from what I'm reading a lot as well, and hear like suggestions from like unemployment funds here in the Netherlands that I've heard that are suggesting to people is like, hey, it's changing how to apply for jobs. Now the best thing to do is to get a referral, to get
Yeah.
yourself out there and start networking.
Interesting.
Versus like stuff like they used to ask people like, hey, you need to apply to this many jobs per month, and now they're not asking that. They're just sort of like get yourself out there and like
Ah,
network. So it's very interesting how that's transitioning. It's already affecting the job market here, for example.
and I'm sure that's happening everywhere. And it's yeah, it reminds me of a cyberpunk book by Neil Stevenson called The Diamond Age. And it also makes me think, going back to the land conversation, the Nick Land philosophy of capitalism, and how technology is such a destabilizing force. I think that that's like undeniable given the last 500 years, but particularly the last 40 years of human civilization, is that it's incredibly destabilizing for culture, for all these things. But I think we're now reaching a point which we started with in the conversation, which is that it's so destabilizing that it destroys things, but because technology is also rapid, it also creates new things as well. And so but in some ways that system, like we just reached this point, is that in some ways it just puts us back into the way things used to be done. because the way things used to be done with hiring was exactly that. There was no online ability to to post about your job. You had newspapers, so you put a classified out. Um, and the online is just in some ways just like an expansion of the newspaper. But it's really interesting. And so Neil Stevenson in the Diamond Age, he talks a lot about sort of like this the return of feudalism and the return of an aristocracy, which the Rand Corporation, which is a sort of think tank that goes into defense, they write a bunch of papers on the future of the world. And so one paper from them I recently came on my awareness is the that 5 years ago we had a cottage core culture. We have cottage core. Are you familiar with what cottage core is? Yeah. So cottage, yeah, for the listeners, cottage core is like everybody going back to their farms, building a homestead, like really cute and all, animals and stuff like that. I got really into it. I had goats and emus and stuff. And so now what's becoming popular is feudal core. I don't think that's the right word, but it's like knights and castles and like small polities. And in some ways, I think these trends kind of like that is where we're headed because people's attention is being captured by those memes. And so I think it's going to be really interesting and weird, this future that we're headed into. But I'm also much more optimistic than I was in the last few years. For the last 5 minutes or so, what is your current optimism versus pessimism level?
Ooh. I read a book by some Harvard economists, uh, and it explains how, um, and the reason I started reading this book is I saw a post from Jan LeCun
Mm,
on LinkedIn where he says like, don't trust the computer scientists that are building stuff to tell you
yeah.
what the impact of the economy is going to be. Listen to the economists. And so like, okay, like um, they're doing this analysis back in 2010s where they start talking about like Uber and self-driving cars and how technology is changing. But they actually go all the way back, not only to like 2010s, they go back to like the industrial era. This whole hypothesis is that, okay, like you need to look at economic cycles in the way that they have happened. And I kind of disagree with the authors at one point, but let me tell you on what should traditionally happen is that whenever you have what we call a GPT, but a GPT is not a general purpose. It's not a generative pre-trained transformer. In their term, these guys coined the term GPT, and they call it GPT is a general purpose technology. It's,
Of
it's a,
course, the economist would do that. It was the economist, not the computer scientist, who called it GPT, right?
yeah. So
Yeah.
this book was written in 2010 or something.
Oh, okay, okay, got it, got it.
This
That's
this
great.
is way before ChatGPT, so actually
Hmm,
quite
hmm, hmm, hmm.
and what it goes about is, okay, a GPT is something that is big enough, a technology that's big enough to affect multiple industries significantly. And they
Yeah,
do the comparison with the GPT, the first GPT was electricity or like the industrial
yeah, got it.
motor. Like you,
Yeah,
you, you can see the
yeah,
steam engine, like you can see different, and there's been two or three GPTs until this day. Maybe the internet can be considered one.
yeah. Interesting.
At the core is every time a GPT has appeared, there's a distribution between what they call the bounty and the share. So uh, the bounty gets bigger, but the distribution gets higher. So you have a lot of people that have high incomes that becomes experts, and the demand for those value and skills the price goes a lot up, and they earn
Yeah,
more money.
yeah.
There's a lot more wealth that's been generated as well, but it's all often been created with a disparity on, okay, even though the bounty gets bigger, the distribution it's a bit skewed towards
For a
people that
small
are
group of people who are able to. There's a book that goes into this called the netocracy, which I haven't read yet, but I've been meaning to go reach out to the founders. But it was actually from the 1990s that talked about that, exactly what you're talking about, which is that the internet created a netocracy, and they were totally right because anybody who invested in Bitcoin in 2012 is now a multimillionaire as long as they held, sometimes maybe a billionaire. Um, exactly right. And if you were going to expand on that, um, were you going to where essentially we have a lot of GPTs now?
Yes, essentially like LLMs or GPTs, and they're affecting
Yeah.
multiple industries.
Yeah.
And this is interesting, where like the expertise required to like build these huge models, like you do see people like meta engineers get or
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
open
$100 million, $300 million. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
getting millions of dollars per year in salaries. And I think like when you look, okay, like experts are always going to be on demand, and people are going to pay a
Interesting.
premium for those prices. But then this GPT is like, okay, it's not only like a few factors that we're switching. Like if this is knowledge work, does this have the potential to disrupt entire industries? There's actually a research paper by OpenAI. It's called GPTs are GPTs.
Oh God. That's great. GPTs are GPTs. What does it say?
And it explores like what the impact could be on different professions and different careers. So I don't remember the outcome, but I'm just gonna throw a number out there. Let's say like 40% of knowledge work is going to be disrupted by AI, and that's sort of like the high level of it. Of like, okay, they do a breakdown, they analyze different industries and how this has the potential to do a lot of different things. I think they're quite accurate, and a lot of the ways that they're depicting, it's very very accurate. Like I do think, okay, this is going to change a lot of things,
Yeah.
which means okay, if everybody, and we have a lot of people that are going to like get displaced because this AI is actually going to come and be able to make certain decisions that don't necessarily require human intervention at some
Yeah.
point. Because for let's say for some problems it's going to happen, but for some of them you're still going to have somebody to review, even if it's just a legality. But it poses a great question. Like everybody today can like learn how to use these GPTs and how to start generating something. So I
And
think
become a GPT themselves.
become a GPT themselves, maybe.
uh, Thank you so much for coming on the show. How can people find out more about you and more about Tender Market?
Yes, you can go to tendermarket.eu and you can add me and follow me on LinkedIn, Juan Francisco Verhoek, or also reach out to my email, Juan, Juan, @tendermarket.eu.
Great.